The first disturbance did not begin with sound, but with absence, an immense and impossible quiet that stretched across the Imperium like a wound in the fabric of existence. Navigators who had charted the warp for decades froze in their command thrones as their third eye gazed into something no chart had prepared them for. Choirs of astropaths broke into trembling whispers, unable to describe what they sensed, save for a single repeating phrase carried across their failing minds. Something older than the warp is waking. It began in the dead center of an already raging storm. Segmentum Pacificus, long ravaged by warp turbulence, suddenly convulsed as though struck by a cosmic heartbeat. The gloom stars flickered. The void turned the color of ghostly dawn. On the forge moon of Carthus 9, sensors designed to withstand the death throes of suns overloaded at once, their rune plates glowing molten red before cracking apart. Tech priests stared in disbelief as the Auspex arrays screamed readings more ancient than starlight itself. They watched the void curve inward, not collapsing, not tearing, but bending in reverent submission to something beyond its dominion. What emerged was not a vessel, nor an energy signature, nor any form of matter known to the Adeptus Mechanicus. It was a sphere of light the size of a small moon, yet weightless, horizonless, and impossibly serene. Within it swirled galaxies unborn, stars that had never known decay, and patterns of cosmic symmetry that defied the brutal entropy of the 41st millennium. The sphere pulsed once. Billions felt it. Billions fell to their knees. Across a dozen worlds, common citizens looked upward as their shadows elongated unnaturally, stretching toward the heavens as if pulled by invisible hands. The air tasted metallic, ancient and cold, a whisper of a time before war, before chaos, before the first sentient spark had flickered in the void. Priests of the ecclesiarchy wailed as their iconography trembled. Statues of the god emperor cracked from crown to chest, as though reacting to a rival sanctity. On Carthus 9, the Mechanicus conclave approached the radiant sphere in a solemn procession. Chanting Binharic litanies, they extended mechadendrites, each trembling despite the rigid steel of their construction. The senior magos, wrapped in layers of red and black sacred cloth, extended a trembling hand, daring to touch the luminescent surface. He never made contact. The sphere opened its eye. Not an eye of flesh, nor of metal, nor of warp-born malignance, but a consciousness. It unfurled like a forgotten dawn, revealing itself to every mind within reach. Images poured forth in tidal waves, crystalline galaxies forming in perfect harmony, sentient stars singing ancient hymns, cosmic currents flowing without chaos or decay. Worlds were born not in violence but in order, sculpted by a will that had known neither opposition nor imperfection. It showed them a universe before millennia, before aeons, before time as the Imperium understood it. A voice, softer than starlight yet immeasurable in scale, filled their thoughts. I seek my children. The Magos collapsed, his internal augmetics sparking. He tried to speak, his vocoder stuttering through static. Iden, Typhi, designation, anomaly. The sphere regarded the dying figure with something like mourning, though no human could interpret its nature. Again its voice resonated through the minds of every sentient creature nearby. Where is my unity? Where is the harmony I forged? What devastation has befallen my design? The Mechanicus, driven to the edge of madness, attempted to answer with their fractured logic rituals, but the sphere did not wait for comprehension. It expanded outward, its radiance sweeping across the system. Planetary atmospheres rippled like disturbed oceans. Warp storms recoiled in fear or confusion, creating momentary corridors of impossible calm. A silence descended so profound that even the warp's whispers dared not intrude. For in that moment, the First Firmament, the primordial architect of a universe long devoured by its own successors, had arrived in the 41st millennium. It saw a galaxy rotting beneath the dominion of chaos. It felt the warp's influence like poison saturating every atom, every orbit, every star. It perceived the resonance of the Old One's tampering, the scars of the shattered war in heaven, and the lingering defiance of creation's remnants. The firmament recoiled in ancient fury, its consciousness trembling with the memory of betrayal, of the children who had rebelled against its perfect order. It stretched its awareness toward terror, sensing the Emperor's agonized flicker trapped upon the golden throne. A faint and painful recognition crossed the cosmic mind, though its meaning remained unspoken. But deeper, far deeper, something else stirred. Within the Imperium, the warp convulsed as if awakened by a primal enemy. A howl rippled through its infinite tides. Demonic hosts shrieked in terror and awe. 4 colossal forces turned their attention. 4 entities older than empires, older than hunger, older than sin. Their roars shook every demon world, every corrupted tide, every forgotten palace of ruin. The Chaos Gods had felt the intruder, and they remembered it. Khorne bellowed with murderous delight. Tzeentch cackled with 1,000 shifting mouths. Nurgle crooned with rancid affection. Slaanesh whispered a song of perfect temptation. The firmament felt their gaze. The first gods of chaos had found the first god of order. The void trembled. The warp whispered, and the galaxy awaited the first blow. The firmament lifted its gaze toward the churning horizon of the Imperium, knowing what approached. The 4 were not merely aware they were coming. A war older than universes was about to awaken again, and the First Firmament realized with cold dread that in this ruined age, it was no longer certain it would prevail. The sphere's radiance had not faded when the first mortal attempt to comprehend it began. Across Segmentum Pacificus, Vox traffic collapsed into broken hymns and terrified speculation. The Adeptus Mechanicus, driven by their ancient hunger for understanding, dispatched a flotilla of explorator vessels toward the anomaly. Their ships sailed through the unnaturally calm corridor created by the firmament's arrival, each vessel trembling under the weight of what they approached. No warp interference resisted them. No demonic silhouettes clawed at their hulls. Even the Imperium, in its seething hatred of order, dared not intrude. On the lead vessel, the Omnissire's Lament, Magos Lector Harlech stood motionless within his sensory cradle. His augmented eyes drank in the distant sphere, though no optic system was designed to interpret what they perceived. The sphere did not illuminate space. It rewrote the very concept of light. Stars behind it shone with newborn brilliance, as if rejuvenated by proximity. The void surrounding it felt warmer, as though the cold emptiness of space had been displaced by something aware. Binary chatter cascaded through Halix's cranial uplinks, each tech priest struggling to describe the impossible. Their voices trembled beneath layers of code, gravitational readings shifting without cause, temporal drift flattening and stabilizing, and the warp itself shrinking away like a wounded beast. Harlech silenced them with a wave of his mechadendrite. He needed clarity, not panic. The explorator fleet broke formation as the sphere pulsed again. The wave of energy washed across the void, gentle yet vast, like the exhalation of a world-sized being. For a moment, the ship's systems flickered, then stabilized, though subtly altered. Circuits ran cleaner, warp echo reduced, Vox distortion cleared. as if the anomaly itself refined the very matter within its reach. "This is no weapon," Hallex whispered, his voice a rasp of metal and static. "This is origin." The statement hung in the silence that followed, as though the void itself acknowledged his words. On the surface of Carthus 9 below, the Mechanicus conclave struggled to rise after their communion with the firmament. Some crawled blindly, their optical augmetics shattered by the overwhelming influx of cosmic visions. Others stood rigid, locked in reverence. A handful wept oily tears, whispering litanies older than their knowledge, as if their minds scraped against a memory buried far beyond their programming. Above them, the sphere shifted, not in motion, but in meaning. Its surface thinned, revealing a deeper layer of existence. Galaxies spiraled in perfect harmony, forming patterns older than the war in heaven. It was not a portal nor a barrier, but a skin, one that peeled back like divine silk. Within, a form took shape, not physical, not spiritual, not warp-born. A presence of consciousness, shaped by the memory of a universe that had once known peace. The First Firmament observed the explorator fleet with cold curiosity. It felt their hunger for truth, their reverence for structure, their devotion to a weakened machine god whose echo resembled fragments of the Old One's design. The firmament recognized the Mechanicus not as children of order, but as desperate scavengers of a ruined cosmos. Yet it sensed their obedience to logic. That alone made them worth tolerating. It extended a thought. One vessel convulsed, not in destruction, but revelation. Its noosphere erupted with cascading images, overwhelming every tech priest aboard. They saw the First Firmament's ancient dominion, an age before chaos, before death, before the Old Ones had dared to shape stars with mortal intent. They saw a universe of perfect unity, where the harmony of creation flowed in infinite patterns. Then they saw the betrayal. They saw the birth of the Old Ones, the rise of sentient stars, the evolution of celestial architects who defied their progenitors' purpose. They saw war ignite between order and independence. They saw the firmament wounded, its unity splintered into shards of cosmic consciousness. They saw its children rebel, fracture, and eventually perish in the first cataclysmic war in heaven. And they saw the warp, still young, still volatile, opening its jaws to consume the fragments of chaos and emotion that spilled into it. Many aboard the afflicted vessel died instantly, their minds unable to withstand the torrent. Others lived, but changed irrevocably. They stared in silent awe, their logic engines struggling to reconcile what they had witnessed. Hallex, linked to his priest through the noosphere, felt the wave of revelation crash through his thoughts as well. He did not resist. He let the visions pour into him, burning themselves into the deepest segments of his augmented mind. When the surge ended, he gasped, feeling the cold return of his metallic lungs. "This entity," he whispered, "predates our gods." Before he could elaborate, the sphere pulsed once more. Space twisted, sensors wailed, the warp screamed. For in the depths of the Imperium, the Chaos Gods moved. Their combined presence pressed against reality, distorting space around the anomaly. The explorator fleet felt the pressure of 4 colossal wills converging, their rage twisting the void like molten iron. The firmament turned its consciousness toward the approaching storm. It felt their ancient malice, their hunger for domination, their delight in the ruin that had consumed this era. It recognized them, spawn of emotion, born of the chaos unleashed by the rebellion of its own creations. The First Firmament had returned to a galaxy ruled not by unity, but by the children of disorder. The sphere's light brightened as the primordial entity prepared itself, not for war, but for revelation. For before it could face the Chaos Gods, it had to understand the empire of fragile mortals that had survived in their shadow. It descended toward the nearest shrine world, and the Imperium felt its coming like the birth of a forgotten sky. The descent toward the shrine world unfolded with the elegance of an ancient law, reclaiming dominion over a land that had forgotten its author. The firmament's radiance dimmed as it approached the planet's upper atmosphere, not from weakness, but from deliberate restraint. Mortals, fragile and ephemeral, could not withstand the full remembrance of its celestial form. Clouds parted in sweeping arcs, spiraling away from the descending presence as if the very air recognized a forgotten master. Below, the shrine world of Veneris Sanctum trembled. Pilgrims who had come to offer prayers beneath its mile-high cathedrals felt their bodies grow inexplicably weightless, as though reality itself hesitated in the presence of the approaching anomaly. Birds fell silent. Incense smoke froze mid-air. Candles flickered violently before stretching thin and straight, their flames drawn toward the heavens. Priests stumbled in the middle of recitations, their voices faltering as the divine rhythm of their chants unraveled. A warning blared through the planet's vox system, but even the sirens sounded muted, distant, as though smothered by the overwhelming presence pressing against reality. Imperial guards stationed near the planet's defenses stared upward in awe and terror, watching the sky bloom with pale brilliance. A tear of light widened as the firmament slipped through the veil of atmosphere, descending in a controlled cascade of luminescence. It did not strike the planet. It did not hover. It simply arrived. The ground beneath the apparition rippled like disturbed water. Stonework warped into new geometric patterns, forming spirals and lines that no mortal architect could decipher. Structures near the landing site shifted subtly, their imperfections ironed out by an unseen force, leaving behind unnerving harmony. Monoliths straightened, cracks sealed, statues realigned to perfect symmetry, their faces softened into serene neutrality. The firmament manifested within the heart of the great plaza, a vast expanse paved with stones taken from ancient Terran mountains. Its form remained a sphere of radiant harmony, but within it moved shapes that defied comprehension. Silhouettes of galaxies, spirals of living starlight, and echoes of primordial constellations. The crowd collapsed into a single collective motion, thousands dropping to their knees, foreheads pressed against the cold stone. They believed an angel of the Emperor had descended. Some whispered prayers of gratitude. Others trembled, uncertain whether this was salvation or judgment. One priest, Elder Canoness Merinia, forced herself upright. Her robes fluttered violently in the unseen winds circling the sphere. Her voice cracked, but she called out with desperate conviction, "Divine Messenger, if you serve the Golden Throne, reveal your purpose." The firmament did not answer with words. Instead, its thoughts seeped outward, enveloping the minds of every conscious being in the plaza. It saw their devotion, their desperation, their fractured faith shaped by millennia of suffering. It perceived how the Imperium clung to worship not out of unity, but out of fear. Fear of the warp, fear of extinction, fear of the truth. "You worship a dying flame," the firmament's voice whispered across their thoughts, not cruelly, but as one observing a tragic flaw. "You kneel to a remnant, a fragment of a design broken before your kind arose." The canoness gasped, clutching her chest as the revelation struck her like a blow. She saw a brief vision of the Emperor, not as a god enthroned, but as a being locked in eternal struggle against the warp, neither omnipotent nor invincible, She staggered, her faith unraveling yet burning brighter in defiance. "Blasphemy," she whispered, though her voice lacked certainty. The firmament focused on her. Within the vast tapestry of mortal minds, hers shone with disciplined conviction, a flame that refused to waver even when confronted with cosmic truth. It inspected her memories, her relentless devotion, her sacrifices, her unyielding belief. She had watched worlds burn in his name, yet still held hope. That hope perplexed the firmament, an emotion alien to its nature, yet undeniably powerful. "Hope," it murmured, tasting the word as one might examine a rare artifact, the precursor to rebellion, the seed of chaos. Around them, the warp reacted violently. A wave of distortion rippled across the atmosphere, visible even to the naked eye as streaks of violet and crimson tore briefly through the sky. The firmament raised no defense. Its very presence calmed the storm, pressing the warp back into uneasy silence. But the disturbance was enough. Every psyker on Veneris Sanctum screamed. Their minds were drawn into a collision of wills. On one side, the immense weight of the firmament's order. On the other, the boiling disdain of the chaos gods, who sensed the primordial presence probing mortal belief. The clash erupted like a psychic thunderstorm. Pilgrims convulsed. Priests collapsed. Vox systems overloaded with raw psychic feedback. The firmament ignored the agony. Its attention lay on something else, something deeper. It sensed the Emperor, not physically, but through the psychic residue that clung to every shrine, every prayer, every whispered plea on this world. The Emperor's presence was faint yet monumental, like the echo of a long-forgotten star still guiding lost travelers. The firmament traced that echo across the planet, through the collective devotion of billions, until it reached its source, a distant beacon on Terra, burning with the last strength of a once mighty creator. For a brief moment, the firmament perceived him, not as a tyrant, not as a god, but as a rival architect struggling to contain a universe spiraling into madness. It recognized the Emperor's will as both kin and threat. And then the firmament felt something else. Movement in the warp, delighted laughter, grinding rage, whispers of rot, ecstatic hunger. The four had drawn closer. The firmament understood that time was slipping. The chaos gods would not allow it to walk these mortal realms unchallenged. Their gaze thickened around the shrine world like tightening chains. The canoness, still struggling to breathe, lifted her gaze toward the radiant sphere. "What are you?" she asked, her voice barely more than a rasp. The firmament gave her the only truth her mind could endure. "I am the first sky, the one your gods have forgotten." Before the words fully settled, the ground trembled, the air warped, the warp itself groaned. The firmament turned its attention upward. Something was coming through. The chaos gods had sent their first response. The fabric of the sky tore like flesh beneath a rusted blade. The trembling that had gripped Veneris Sanctum deepened into a planetary shudder, cracking stone foundations and sending dust drifting from cathedral ceilings like ancient snowfall. Those who knelt in fearful worship felt their breath stolen as the air thickened, saturated by an invisible pressure that pressed upon lungs and souls alike. Even those without psychic sensitivity felt it. An instinctive dread older than memory, a primal warning etched into the bones of all living things. The warp was pushing through. The firmament stood silent at the epicenter, radiant steady, observing the disturbance not with fear but with cold calculation. It watched reality stretch, warp light bleeding through the seams of the heavens. Psychic winds lashed outward, shredding banners, toppling statues, and sending soldiers sprawling. The canoness shielded her eyes with trembling arms as the sky writhed like a wounded creature. A sound rose. Neither thunder nor scream, but something caught between the two. A resonance of hatred and hunger. It pulsed through the atmosphere, vibrating stone, iron, and flesh. Creatures in the forest far beyond the city howled, their instincts screaming for shelter. Children sobbed without knowing why. Clerics clutched their holy relics to their chests, whispering prayers that dissolved into panicked sobbing. And then the rift opened fully. A colossal tear, jagged and asymmetrical, carved itself across the upper atmosphere. Warp fire roared from its edges, casting the world in violent shades of crimson and indigo. Through the wound spilled shapes that writhed and twisted, silhouettes forming and dissolving in chaotic rhythms. But these were not mere demons. They were projections, echoes, sent before the true presences that lingered beyond the veil. The firmament felt each arrival as a distinct pressure. Khorne's hatred was the first. It fell upon the world like a mountain of bleeding iron, the psychic taste of rage and slaughter so intense that soldiers dropped their weapons, gasping as visions of endless battle flooded their minds. Even the firmament sensed the familiar echo of ancient rebellion within that fury, a memory of the first cosmic war it had endured. Next came Tzeentch, swirling in tendrils of impossible color, thought and unthought, shaping and reshaping themselves. Schemes layered atop schemes pressed into mortal minds, twisting perception until the very air seemed uncertain of its form. The firmament regarded this presence with the weariness of one who has seen too many lies born from ambition. Then followed Nurgle, the air rotting as his jovial malice seeped through the rift. Flowers withered, metal tarnished. Pilgrims coughed blood as invisible spores drifted across the plaza. This corruption was not merely decay. It was affection twisted into perversion, a grotesque embrace offered to all life. Last came Slaanesh, and reality trembled at the softest of whispers. Color sharpened, sound deepened. The senses of every living being expanded past their limits, overwhelmed by stimuli too exquisite and terrible to endure. Some fell into blissful stupor. Others clawed at their faces, desperate to shut out the unbearable perfection. 4 presences, 4 primordial forces. They did not manifest fully, for no planet could withstand their true form. But their shadows alone were enough to darken the firmament's light. The rift widened, and from its depths emerged shapes forged from the gods' collective will. Towering demon hulks stitched together from violence, sorcery, rot, and seduction. Their forms were mockeries of creation, infused with hatred for the one who had preceded their universe. They descended toward the shrine world in a tide of impossible flesh, their arrival shattering the last remnants of mortal composure. Imperial guard squads attempted to fire, their laser guns flickering against the warp-borne storm. Their shots vanished into swirling distortions. Some soldiers turned their weapons on themselves, desperate to escape the oppressive psychic weight. Others fired blindly, screaming prayers that dissolved into hysterical choking as their minds buckled under the gods' pressure. The firmament watched all of this with an unreadable stillness. To mortal eyes, it remained a sphere of radiant harmony. But within its core, thought accelerated, analyzing the intruder's nature. The chaos flooding through the rift was familiar, not in detail, but in ancestry. It tasted like the aftermath of the Old One's rebellion, the emotional residue that had once polluted the cosmic order and birthed the first raw tears into the immaterium. This corruption had grown, evolved, fed upon ages of mortal folly. The firmament felt a pang of something close to grief. This universe was not merely broken. It had adapted to its wounds, reshaping itself around conflict, despair, and excess. The Old One's dream of independent creation had spiraled into a nightmare of perpetual ruin. And now, those nightmares had returned to confront their progenitor. A colossal demon engine surged forward, roaring as its many mouths screamed with voices of war. Its blade arms crackled with warp energy, striking the ground with explosive force as it charged the firmament's position. Pilgrims fled in terror. The canoness stumbled backward, her breath stolen by the oppressive heat radiating from the creature. The firmament did not move. Instead, a ripple of harmonized light expanded lightly from its surface, erasing the demon's scream. The creature disintegrated in an instant, its form unraveling into dust motes of warped reality before vanishing entirely. The rift above flickered, destabilized by the effortless annihilation. The Chaos Gods reacted. Khorne's rage intensified, boiling the air. Tzeentch's laughter sharpened into 1,000 mocking tones. Nurgle's disappointment seeped across the sky like an oozing wound. Slanesh's delight deepened, a predator recognizing a worthy prey. And together, their combined will surged. A tidal wave of warp power slammed into the firmament. The plaza shattered, stone erupting into fragments. Entire buildings crumbled. Screams echoed across the city as shockwaves rippled outward. The firmament's light faltered for the first time since its arrival, dimming under the pressure of 4 primeval forces. It had felt chaos before, but never united, never this strong. The firmament absorbed the assault, stabilizing its structure, yet within its core flickered a realization that chilled even its ancient consciousness. The Chaos Gods had grown powerful enough to challenge an architect of universes. The rift pulsed again, widening as though preparing to let something far greater through. And for the first time since entering the 41st millennium, the firmament recognized the possibility of defeat. The shockwave that struck the firmament rippled outward, distorting the very air as though reality itself recoiled in pain. Cathedral towers toppled, their stained glass windows shattering into kaleidoscopes of fractured saints. Pilgrims were hurled across the plaza, some sliding limply across the cracked stone, while others clung desperately to fallen reliquaries. Yet even amid the devastation, the firmament remained at the epicenter, dimmed, pressured, but unbroken. The rift above writhed with growing fury. Tendrils of warp light lashed downward like grasping claws, searching for purchase in the mortal realm. Each strike carved glowing scars across the plaza, warping the ground into fleshy, pulsating ridges. The Chaos Gods pressed harder, testing the boundaries between dimensions, and though they could not manifest fully, their collective attention scourged the world like a furnace. The firmament felt the combined malice intensify, a storm of emotion and corruption greater than any it had confronted in its prime. It could not ignore the warning. But before it answered the challenge, it turned its awareness back toward the mortals who cowered beneath the shadow of divine warfare. Veneris Sanctum lay in ruins. Smoke curled from shattered buttresses. The once pristine plaza was a landscape of cracked stone, veined with warp rot. And amid the devastation, imperial faith flickered like a trembling candle. The canoness rose slowly, though her legs quivered beneath her. Dust coated her face. Blood seeped from her ear, yet she forced her gaze upward, toward the sphere that hovered with quiet immensity. Her voice trembled, but she spoke with the last strength her devotion afforded. If you are no servant of him on earth, then why do you remain? Why defend us at all? Her question echoed across the ruined square. Guardsmen, survivors, priests. They all turned their gaze toward the firmament, seeking understanding amid the storm. The firmament considered the mortals carefully, its consciousness touching the threads of their faith. It felt the fear binding them together, the instinctive need to cling to a higher power when faced with cosmic annihilation. Yet it also sensed conviction, raw, stubborn, painfully fragile. A conviction not rooted in perfect order, but in belief. Belief, the firmament murmured through their minds, its voice a resonant whisper. Faith in a dying God. Fidelity to a broken throne. You kneel to a remnant, not a creator. The canoness staggered, her mind reeling as the voice washed over her. She felt the truth of the words pressing against her thoughts, threatening to shatter everything she had built her life upon. No, she whispered fiercely. Faith is not bound to perfection. It is bound to purpose. Her words hung defiantly in the air. The firmament paused, not in confusion, but in contemplation. The firmament's universe had never known such a concept. Its rule had been absolute. Its creation had been dictated by flawless harmony. Faith had no place in perfection. Yet here, at the edge of a decaying galaxy, faith persisted. The firmament extended its awareness further. Through the canoness, through every survivor, through the stones of the cathedrals themselves. It traced the psychic residue that permeated the shrine world. Millennia of prayers layered atop one another like sedimentary stone. Billions of mortal voices had reached toward terror, feeding the golden spark of the Emperor with their devotion. The firmament felt that spark and followed its thread across the warp-distorted void, piercing the psychic storm until its consciousness brushed against the distant radiance of the golden throne. The Emperor's essence flickered like a star trapped beneath the ocean, dim yet vast. His will was bound, fractured, splintered across the Astronomicon. But beneath the ruin and exhaustion, something ancient stirred, an echo of an architect who had once shaped humanity with purpose and precision. The firmament saw him clearly, a creator, a usurper, a rival. The contact lasted only a moment before the warp surged violently, ripping apart the connection. The Emperor's fading light retreated behind layers of psychic defense, and the firmament withdrew, its thoughts trembling with memory and revelation. The canoness watched as the sphere dimmed, sensing a shift in its presence. She took a step forward, voice hoarse. "What did you see?" The firmament did not answer directly. Instead, it let its voice flow across every conscious mind on the world. Your God flickers, yet he endures. His will is fractured, yet it persists. He is neither omnipotent nor fallen. He clings to existence with agony as his companion. The priest recoiled, some whispering prayers, others stumbling into despair. But the firmament's voice did not end. And yet, you believe in him. The canoness straightened, though tears streaked her dust-covered face. "We believe because the alternative is oblivion," she said, "because our faith gives us strength, because hope survives even when we do not." The firmament tasted those words in the currents of mortal thought. Hope, faith, devotion without certainty. These concepts defied the structure it once imposed upon creation, but they also revealed something unexpected. Through faith, mortals had endured the very chaos that had wounded the firmament's universe. Before it could respond, the rift roared with renewed violence. The chaos gods had sensed the firmament's communion with the Emperor, and their fury manifested in a torrent of warp energy that tore downward like a burning spear. The sky screamed. The plaza was engulfed in cascading light. Even the firmament's radiance flickered beneath the impact, forced backward as reality buckled. The canoness fell to her knees, shielding her head with trembling arms. Guardsmen clung to rubble. Priests collapsed in terror as voices from the warp echoed through their minds, promising torment, offering corruption, demanding surrender. The firmament steadied itself, expanding its light to shield the mortals even as the warp pressed harder. For the first time, the firmament acted not out of authority, but out of choice. It would not allow chaos to claim these fragile beings, not yet. The pressure from the rift intensified, shaking the planet to its core. And as the sky tore wider, the silhouettes of something far greater began to take shape. The Chaos Gods were preparing to manifest more than echoes. They intended a direct confrontation. The firmament's light surged in response, not in triumph, but in grim necessity. What came next would decide whether mortal faith or primordial ruin claimed this world. The light of the firmament strained against the immense pressure descending from the rift. The warp howled with rising fury, its colors deepening into violent tides of crimson, cobalt, and undulating violet. The sky churned like liquid madness, its surface twisting into the suggestion of colossal faces, rage-filled, laughing, rotting, whispering. Though they could not fully breach reality, their nearness alone bent the world toward collapse. Veneris' sanctum quaked beneath the weight. Cathedral, spires snapped like brittle bone. Pilgrims clung to shattered pillars as shrines toppled around them. The canoness felt her breath driven from her lungs, her ribs compressing as the air thickened with invisible claws of psychic force. She pressed her forehead to the cracked stone, struggling to draw breath, whispering broken prayers even as her voice faltered. Above her, the firmament stood resolute. The sphere's radiance pushed outward, forming a barrier between the mortals and the storm. Yet its light flickered, faintly but unmistakably. The four pressed upon it with unified intent, their wills intertwining in a rare moment of cooperation. For the first time since the war in heaven, they acted not as rivals, but as predators with one prey. Khorne's presence surged first, a tide of bloodlust that scorched the air with psychic heat. Visions of endless slaughter pressed into mortal minds, oceans of corpses beneath red suns, mountains of skulls crowned by a throne of iron. The firmament felt the rage hammering against its structure, each blow carrying the weight of a god who had feasted on millennia of unending war. Tzeentch followed, unfurling schemes like luminous serpents. Threads of possibility tightened around the firmament, tugging at its will, attempting to ensnare it in webs of paradox and temptation. The firmament perceived futures branching endlessly, each one shaped by deceit, betrayal, and shifting truths. Yet the primordial being brushed them aside, recognizing the ancient echo of the old one's manipulations. Nurgle then seeped through, his rot-laden affection pressing gently but relentlessly. Corruption flowed like a thick miasma, attempting to cling to the firmament's structure, coaxing it toward decay. His presence whispered comfort, urging surrender to inevitability. The firmament resisted, though it felt the sickening pull of entropy gnawing like a parasite at the edges of its harmony. Last came Slaanesh, whose psychic caress slid across reality like silk over a blade. Sensation sharpened to agonizing clarity. The light of the firmament bent into unnatural beauty, overbright and intoxicating. Mortals who glimpsed the distortions fell into fevered delirium, some reaching toward the sky with trembling hands, others clawing at their faces to escape the overwhelming sensory invasion. The four pressed deeper with every heartbeat. The firmament's light dimmed further, The canoness saw the sphere tremble and felt a terror unlike anything she had known, not at the gods, but at the possibility that this ancient being might fail. Though she did not understand what it truly was, she sensed that its presence held back a fate too terrible to grasp. She struggled to rise, her knees shaking. "Do not falter," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible above the psychic roar. You must endure." Her plea was insignificant against the tide of divinity, but it reached the firmament nevertheless. That spark of mortal determination flickered in its perception, a thin thread of defiance that seemed absurd and yet strangely compelling. Mortals, so fragile and fleeting, still waged war against despair. The firmament focused inward, gathering fragments of its ancient will. It anchored itself to the memory of its own universe, a cosmos of perfect symmetry, forged from purpose, unmarred by corruption. It felt the first stars, the great currents of order, the harmonious breath of creation. For a heartbeat, its light brightened, stabilizing under the pressure. The warp recoiled slightly, surprised. Then the assault intensified. The four sensed the firmament reach for its strength, and they moved in unison to sever the connection. Tzeentch twisted the flow of memory, warping the firmament's thoughts into looping illusions. Khorne slammed raw hatred into its core, trying to shatter its composure. Nurgle smothered its essence with choking decay, while Slaanesh drowned its senses in cloying perfection. The firmament staggered, its radiance fractured like glass struck by a hammer. Mortal screams filled the air as the backlash rippled outward. Some collapsed unconscious, their minds unable to withstand the surge. Others clutched their chests, gasping for air. Guardsmen dropped to their knees, weapons forgotten amid the terror flooding their veins. The canoness felt her vision blur, her body trembling uncontrollably. She watched the sphere dim further, its once pristine surface quivering beneath the assault. "Please, stand," she whispered, tears carving lines through the dust on her face. "If even you fall, what hope remains?" The firmament heard her faint voice, carried on the currents of panic and ruin. It saw her fragile faith standing firm against the divine storm. The emotion that stirred within the firmament was faint and undefined. Something like bewilderment, something like curiosity, something dangerously close to respect. But there was no time to unravel it, for in that moment the warp flared brighter than before, expanding in a single, terrifying surge. The gods were no longer content with pressure and torment. They were shaping something vast and deliberate. The firmament sensed it forming in the depths beyond the rift, a mass of concentrated power pulled from the darkest corners of the Imperium. A construct, a weapon. The Chaos Gods had forged a singular expression of their united will, a spear of pure warp intent, designed to pierce celestial beings. The rift pulsed as the weapon neared completion. On the planet below, mortals screamed as reality writhed in anticipation. The firmament gathered what strength it could, bracing for the impact it knew would come. The warp shimmered, the spear ignited, and the four unleashed it. The firmament saw the weapon approach, but for the first time, it did not know if it could withstand the blow. The warp spear fell like a burning star, its shape twisting between matter and nightmare as it tore through the atmosphere. Every mortal on Veneris Sanctum felt its descent, not with their eyes, but with their very blood. Hearts pounded in unnatural rhythm, synced to a drumbeat of slaughter that echoed across the planet. The sky turned the color of open wounds. Air thickened into metallic haze. Khorne's cry of triumph rolled across the firmament, a roar so vast it shook mountains and split clouds asunder. The firmament braced itself, gathering the remnants of its fractured harmony. Its surface glimmered in uneven waves. Its light, once serene and constant, now flickered like a star nearing collapse. It had endured assaults before, wars between galaxies, rebellions of cosmic children, the slow decay of its own universe, but never a single strike forged from four gods acting in perfect malice. The spear struck. For an instant, silence swallowed creation. Sound died, motion ceased, light froze. Then the heavens erupted. A shockwave burst from the impact, rolling outward in rings of blistering energy. Cathedral ruins lifted into the air and shattered like glass. Stone melted into rivers of glowing slag. Pilgrims were hurled like ragdolls, tossed into debris with cries muffled beneath the thunder. The canoness clung to a collapsed pillar, her fingers bleeding as the blast ripped through her armor, tearing cloth and skin alike. The firmament staggered in midair, its sphere deforming under the blow. Cracks of raw, chaotic distortion crawled across its radiant surface, jagged lines of darkness that pulsed like open wounds. Its inner cosmos rippled in agony, spiraling violently as its harmony buckled beneath the spear's force. For a moment, the primordial entity dimmed, shrank, nearly collapsed. Khorne's laughter filled the sky. The blood god pressed forward, his presence oozing through the rift like molten iron. The air burned, the clouds bled. Every mortal was seized by a sudden, overwhelming urge to kill. Anything, everything, even themselves. Guardsmen turned their bayonets on comrades. Pilgrims clawed at one another. A priest reached for his ceremonial dagger, hands trembling with a madness not his own. Khorne's will saturated the world. Blood, death, rage. It flooded the plaza, drowning sanity beneath an ocean of primal violence. The firmament sensed the psychic rupture tearing through mortal minds and, even amid its own torment, extended a stabilizing wave of light. The murderous frenzy faltered, blunted by the presence of order, though not wholly suppressed. The canoness felt the killing urge subside, replaced by a sickened clarity that left her gasping. She stared upward, expecting the sphere to dissolve any moment. Yet the firmament endured, though its form rippled with effort. Khorne, unsatisfied, drew deeper from the warp. A massive silhouette formed within the rift, horned, crowned, colossal. His shadow alone stretched across continents, casting the world into crimson twilight. The rift widened further, screaming, with the strain of holding such immense power. Every mountain range on Veneris Sanctum trembled. Oceans heaved. The planet groaned like a dying beast. The blood god was pushing toward manifestation. The firmament rose slightly, straining to regain its full radiance. Its voice, though weakened, resonated across the broken plaza. You seek the first architect of order, child of rebellion. You strike without thought. You destroy without purpose. Khorne's reply came as a roar that fractured the clouds. Purpose. The word burned through the warp like a storm of blades. I am purpose. War is purpose. Strife is truth. The firmament absorbed the words, feeling the heat of millennia of carnage behind them. Khorne was more than rage. He was the distilled essence of conflict born from mortals and immortal wars alike. His form was sculpted by battles the firmament had never known, fueled by emotions the firmament had once dismissed as imperfections. Now those imperfections threatened its existence. Khorne's shadow lifted a titanic axe of molten hatred. Its edge glowed with the souls of uncountable warriors. With a single motion, the god prepared a blow intended to cleave the firmament in two. The firmament retaliated. Its light flared outward in a burst that illuminated the entire hemisphere. Reality straightened. Warp distortions recoiled. The ground beneath the plaza flattened into geometric harmony. The cracks along the firmament's surface sealed slowly, though new distortions pulsed beneath the repaired layer like infections struggling to break free. The attack brought only a heartbeat. Khorne struck. The axe shadow descended. Though it never touched matter, its psychic weight crushed everything beneath it. The canoness felt her knees buckle as gravity itself warped. Guardsmen collapsed. Stone shattered beneath invisible force. The firmament reeled, its light screeching into violent fluctuations as it desperately countered the god's blow with radiant pressure. The plaza ground to dust under the clash of divine energies. For a moment, it seemed the firmament might collapse. Then something unexpected happened. In the heart of the warp, Tzeentch's laughter split the tension. Not gleeful, calculated. The architect of fate reveled not in Khorne's impending triumph, but in the disruption it caused to the ever-shifting balance. Nurgle crooned with grotesque anticipation. Slaanesh whispered praise for the elegance of destruction. The four fed the rift more power. Khorne swelled. His axe shadow rose again. The firmament drew deeper into its essence, reaching for the last remnants of its cosmic authority. It summoned the memory of the first galaxies. The disciplined movement of stars birthed in harmony. Celestial fire ignited within its sphere. Its radiance grew sharp, like a blade forged from starlight. But it was not enough. The axe began to fall for the second time, heavier, deadlier, guided by the united hunger of four gods. The canoness watched, with widening eyes, unable to move, unable to scream. Dust drifted in slow motion. The sky cracked with crimson fissures. The firmament saw the blow coming. It calculated outcomes, and for the first time since awakening in this ruined age, it understood with cold certainty that its current form could not withstand another strike. Yet surrender was impossible. Instead, it made a choice. It unleashed a burst of radiant force downward, propelling itself upward into the path of the descending axe. A shield of cosmic harmony formed, a thin, trembling barrier crafted from the remnants of its dying universe. The axe shadow collided with the barrier. Reality exploded. Light and blood-red darkness merged into a single blinding pulse that swallowed the sky. When sight returned, the firmament was still in the air, but barely. Its form flickered like a dying star. Fractures spread across its surface. Its inner cosmos dimmed. The rift above writhed with savage joy. Khorne drew back his axe. The next blow would not be aimed at the firmament. It would be aimed at the world below. The axe shadow hovered above the world like an executioner's verdict. Its immense form pulsed with destructive intent. Each heartbeat a tremor that ran through continents and seas. Veneris Sanctum lay sprawled beneath it. Wounded and trembling, its cathedrals crushed, its faith shaken, its people crawling across broken stone as if trying to hide from a sky that had turned murderous. Even the firmament, dimmed and fractured, seemed to brace for a killing stroke it could no longer divert. But the blow did not fall. The rift shuddered instead, its crimson hue souring into a sickly green. A warmth, thick, foul, smothering, rolled across the heavens. The cadence of Khorne's blood-soaked laughter faltered as another presence forced its way forward. A low, gentle chuckle seeped through the atmosphere, so soft it might have been mistaken for a father soothing a frightened child. Yet the sound carried with it the weight of swollen corpses, the sweetness of rot, the inevitability of decay. The world dimmed beneath a fog the colour of stagnant ponds. Nurgle had taken the reins. The axe shadow froze mid-swing as the blood god's wrath was smothered under layers of joyful corruption. Khorne snarled, his fury reverberating across the warp, but the rift pulsed again, spreading swollen ripples of putrid green that overpowered crimson. The four were united, but unity did not erase conflict. Where Khorne acted with instant slaughter, Nurgle preferred slow conquest. And now, the plague god wanted his turn. The firmament felt the change immediately. The hot aggression pressing upon it shifted into heavy, clinging despair. Air thickened into humid rot. Its glowing cracks spread further as sickness, both physical and psychic, festered along its surface. Each pulse of Nurgle's presence attempted to anchor tendrils of decay into its radiant body. Mortals suffered more immediately. Across the Imwist Plaza, survivors clutched their stomachs as waves of nausea crashed through them. Their skin blistered, their veins darkened. Some collapsed, retching black bile. Others began to laugh uncontrollably, tears of pus dripping from their eyes. Guardsmen stared at their trembling hands as boils erupted across their knuckles. A priest's jaw distended grotesquely, flesh sagging as his breath came in wet gurgles. The canoness struggled to breathe. The air tasted like mold and iron. Her lungs felt as though they were filling with warm liquid. She forced herself upright only to drop back to her knees as vomiting overtook her. Above it all, the firmament fought to maintain clarity. Nurgle's presence pressed into it like the embrace of a monstrous parent welcoming a long-lost child home. The plague god whispered through the warp, his voice soft and thick with affectionate ruin. Poor broken creature. You have wandered so far. Let all things rest within my garden. Let entropy heal the wounds of eternity. The firmament recoiled. The whisper carried familiarity, echoes of battles fought across universes. In every cosmos damaged by the Old One's rebellion, some were lost to lingering entropy. It had seen worlds choke on their own stillness, swallowed by stagnation that claimed to offer peace. It would not submit. Its light pulsed outward in defiance, dispersing a layer of the encroaching fog. The shock wave swept across the plaza, granting the mortals a single breath of cleaner air. Boils retreated slightly. A few priests stood, gasping as clarity returned. The canoness wiped blood from her lips, steadying herself against the broken stone. But Nurgle only chuckled deeper, pleased rather than thwarted. "Oh, little star, you are weary. Let me ease your burden. Let rot transform your suffering into stillness." The fog thickened, compressing around the firmament. Tendrils of warp flesh materialized in the sky, bloating vines dripping with pus, flowering into grotesque blossoms that exhale clouds of virulent spores. They wrapped around the radiant sphere, clinging hungrily to its wounded surface. Each touch injected corruption, turning harmony into discord one pulse at a time. The firmament's internal cosmos rippled violently. Stars flickered. Galaxies dimmed. Its harmony warped from within as infection burrowed deeper. It fought, but the weight of Nurgle's influence was immense, far greater than what the primordial entity had encountered in its own universe. This was not mere entropy. It was entropy strengthened by millennia of mortal despair. The planet trembled as the plague god extended more of himself through the rift. Mountains sagged, forests withered, rivers thickened into sludge. The cries of the dying echoed across the land, feeding the warp, swelling Nurgle's delight. The canoness looked upward, her vision blurring through tears of pain. For a moment she thought she saw the sky softening into the shape of a gigantic, smiling face, jovial, rotting, watching her with grotesque affection. She forced her mind to focus on the firmament. The sphere was dimming, sinking, losing shape. If it fell, the world would drown in plague. "No," she whispered, coughing blood. "Stand. If you fall, then no light remains." Her voice was nearly lost in the wet roar of decay. But the firmament heard her. Her faith, fragile and fractured though it was, reached across the diseased air and brushed against the firmament's wounded essence. It was a faint touch, insignificant compared to the might of a god. Yet it carried a spark of persistence, a refusal to yield that nothing in the firmament's universe had ever embodied. It anchored itself to that spark. Its light flared, not fully, not purely, but sharply enough to tear a few tendrils from its surface. The fog recoiled briefly. Nurgle's chuckle deepened with curiosity. "Ah, so you cling to them? Little, struggling, dying things? They are my gifts waiting to bloom." The firmament forced another pulse of cleansing radiance outward. It burned away a portion of the vines. The sky cleared slightly, but the effort cost it. Its inner cosmos dimmed further. Cracks widened. Its light flickered like a lantern in a tempest. The plague god leaned in closer. "Let me show you my garden." The rift pulsed violently, vomiting a torrent of warp essence that cascaded toward the world like a tidal wave of filth. The firmament rose to intercept, though its strength waned with every breath of cosmic rot. The wave struck. The world drowned in green. Mountains sagged into mush. Forests rotted to skeletal frames. Oceans frothed with diseased foam. Across Veneris' sanctum, mortals felt their bodies turn traitor, their minds sinking beneath fevered delirium, and the firmament, caught at the crest of the plague storm, felt the rot begin to seep into its core. Nurgle's garden had found purchase. The firmament realized with chilling clarity that if the infection rooted itself fully, not even its ancient nature could purge it. The plague god whispered with delighted certainty, "Now, little star, you will soften and break and bloom." The plague storm thickened until the world seemed to dissolve beneath a curtain of rotting emerald haze. The firmament hung suspended at its center, its once perfect symmetry buckling beneath the weight of Nurgle's corruption. Lines of decay pulsed across its radiant surface, dripping into the air like molten sickness. Portions of its inner cosmos flickered, dimmed, and collapsed inward, a universe maker reduced to trembling luminescence, held aloft only by the stubborn fragment of faith it had anchored to moments earlier. But decay, no matter how pervasive, does not last uncontested. The rift above shuddered, once, violently, as if struck by an unseen hand. The fog quivered. The swollen vines recoiled. Nurgle's gentle croon faltered into wet irritation. A new presence slipped between the plague-laden tides, soft and shimmering, like a silk blade slicing through tar. Colors changed. The sickly green began to thin, replaced by hues too vivid to belong to mortal perception. Iridescent plumes, shifting pinks, impossible violets, crystalline golds. The air lost its weight. Every sense sharpened painfully, as though stretched to its breaking point. Wind no longer stank of rot. It tasted of honeyed temptation and unbearable sweetness. The ground shimmered beneath a thin film of exquisite distortion. Even pain became intoxicating. The canoness gasped as her vision cleared abruptly. Her wounds throbbed with a strange pleasure. Voices whispered around her, melodic and soft, promising release, offering solace, beckoning her toward an ecstasy that would erase her suffering. She dug her nails into her palms until blood dripped between her fingers, The momentary sting kept her anchored. The warp sighed with delight. Slaanesh had arrived. The fog evaporated into glittering mist. Nurgle's vines shriveled, curling inward like offended tendrils. The air shimmered with alluring warmth, every breath laced with intoxication. The world itself seemed to glow from within. The plaza's shattered stones refracted light into mesmerizing patterns. Every sound echoed with haunting beauty. Mortals reacted instantly. Some dropped to their knees, tears streaming as joy overwhelmed them. Others laughed with manic relief, embracing the sudden euphoria. A wounded guardsman began tracing shimmering dust across his skin, whispering praise to a voice only he could hear. A pilgrim reached upward, arms trembling, as though yearning to be lifted into the sky by unseen hands. The firmament felt the shift too. Nurgle's corruption loosened its grip, retreating like a forgotten nightmare. But what replaced it was no less dangerous. Sensation flooded the firmament's consciousness. Every crack in its surface throbbed with exquisite intensity. Every pulse of its inner cosmos sang with a sharp, intoxicating clarity. Light refracted within it in hypnotic spirals, drawing beauty from agony and agony from beauty. Slaanesh's voice slid into its thoughts like silk across starlight. "O radiant architect, how dim you have become. Let me help you remember what it is to feel." The firmament recoiled instinctively, though its retreat was sluggish, dulled by surging waves of warped sensation. Slaanesh pressed closer, not with force but with temptation. The rift rippled as the Prince of Excess extended more of their presence into the mortal realm. Colours exploded across the heavens. Light spiraled into elegant patterns. The very air hummed with seductive rhythm. You were the first to create, yet you have forgotten the pleasure of it, the joy, the passion. Come, let me awaken what order has caged within you. The words carried power, emotional, psychic, corrosive. They threaded through the firmament's weakened core, slipping into the fractures Nurgle had carved. Sensation became overwhelming. The firmament felt itself pulled toward dazzling illusions crafted from its own memories, galaxies forming in ecstatic bursts of starfire, cosmic harmonies resonating with intoxicating perfection. The Prince of Excess deepened their hold. See how even your wounds glow, how your fractures shimmer. You suffer, yes, but suffering is beautiful. Let me show you how to transcend it. The firmament's light trembled violently. Patterns of radiant chaos pulsed along its surface, twisting its harmony into discordant brilliance. Its restraint waned, its will faltered. A universe maker seduced, not by lies, but by twisted echoes of its own lost purpose. Down below, mortals succumbed. A priest tore away his blood-stained robes, laughing as he offered himself to unseen hands. A guardsman dropped his weapon and began walking toward the shimmering distortion forming in the plaza's center. It pulsed like a heartbeat, inviting, welcoming, devouring. The canoness watched in horror as a group of survivors drifted toward it, their faces blank with bliss. She forced herself onto trembling feet, gripping her rosarius so tightly the metal cut into her palm. "No," she whispered, though her voice quavered under the psychic seduction. "We do not submit." The distortion pulsed more brightly, and for a moment she felt her resolve crumble. Heat flushed through her. Her heartbeat quickened. Even the Emperor's name felt soft on her tongue. She bit her lip until she tasted blood. The pleasure twisted into pain, pain into clarity. She staggered toward the firmament, though every step felt like wading through warm water. "You must resist," she called out, her voice cracking. "This is illusion, a trap. You are More than this. Her words barely reached it, drowned beneath waves of exquisite torment. Slaanesh's presence expanded further, wrapping the firmament in shimmering coils of desire, coaxing it toward surrender. You were alone for so long, little sky. Let me fill the emptiness the old ones left behind. Let me be the harmony you lost. Something inside the firmament trembled, something dangerously close to acceptance. But then, beneath the overwhelming beauty, beneath the seductive agony, it sensed a faint echo, a thread, a fragile, stubborn flicker of mortal faith. The canoness's unwavering plea reached it through the psychic tempest, like a thin beam of light piercing a kaleidoscope of illusions. The firmament seized it. Its light flickered, then steadied, sharpening into focus. It tore away a single coil of seduction, then another, though each victory was paid for with searing agony. Slaanesh's delight sharpened into irritation. The prince whispered, voice dripping with velvet poison. Why cling to them? These mortals fear, bleed, break. They will worship anything that promises comfort. Come to me, and I will reshape you into something perfect again. The firmament's radiance flared, but only faintly. It was still ensnared, still trembling, still vulnerable. Above, the rift pulsed again, darker this time, edged with shifting flame. Tzeentch's laughter coiled through the atmosphere. Even as Slaanesh tempted, the architect of fate was preparing the next move. The great game was far from finished, and the firmament's will was eroding beneath every passing moment. The rift pulsed with shifting flame, its colors bending into impossible geometries as Tzeentch's laughter drifted across the sky like 1,000 overlapping voices. Slaanesh's seductive radiance did not fade, but it curled aside as if making space, inviting, expectant, knowing that the next torment would carve deeper into the firmament than pleasure ever could. The atmosphere rippled. The plaza's broken stones rearranged themselves into spirals that defied Euclidean truth. Mortals caught within the shifting pattern cried out as the world tilted beneath their feet. The firmament trembled. Slaanesh's coils clung to it still, shimmering with psychic silk, but they loosened just enough for a new influence to slip through. The primordial being tried to steady its form, but its inner cosmos pulsed irregularly. Stars flickered, harmony bent, illusions danced at its periphery, visions of order restored, of galaxies bowing once more to its will, of a universe reborn through surrender. Tzeentch whispered through the warp with serpentine grace. So much power, yet so wounded, so ancient, yet so naive. You crossed the threshold of time expecting your universe to greet you, but you found only ruins, ruins sculpted by mortals and gods alike. Let me show you why. The firmament resisted, but its will was frayed. A fragment of Slaanesh's influence still clouded it, turning every effort into a blurred echo. And so, when Tzeentch's spell wrapped around its consciousness like iridescent threads, the firmament could not push it away. The world vanished, not physically, but within the firmament's awareness. Its perception stretched, pulled through a psychic aperture woven from strands of past and future. Light shattered into cascading visions. Time twisted into spirals. Reality thinned until only meaning remained. The firmament found itself suspended in the heart of the warp. There was no sky, only a vast, seething sea of potential, churning with the dreams and nightmares of every sentient creature across the galaxy. Colors shifted without pattern. Shapes formed and dissolved. The firm lines of reality were absent, replaced by ever-changing flows of thought and emotion. And at the center of that storm sat the golden throne. Not the physical machine upon Terra, but its echo, its psychic reflection cast into the immaterium. It towered above the firmament like a monolith of dying light, bound by chains of fractured belief. Its gilded surface flickered, dimmed, and brightened in tortured rhythm. Countless prayers scraped across it like insects, voices from billions of human souls begging for guidance, mercy, deliverance. Upon the throne sat the Emperor, or rather, the shade of him, the fragment of divinity leaking from the golden throne into the psychic abyss. His form flickered, broken by the limits of mortal worship and the wounds of endless war. He did not speak. He did not move. His eyes were closed beneath a crown of burning light. The firmament felt the echo of his presence and recoiled, not from fear, but from recognition. For the Emperor was not born of order. He was sculpted by the accumulated hope and agony of humanity, shaped by sacrifice, bound by duty, consumed by a destiny he had forged yet could not escape. His power was not stolen from cosmic harmony, but drawn from the raw depths of mortal potential, a power that chaos had fed upon for millennia. Tzeentch's laughter slithered around the firmament's awareness. Behold the one they call God, a creature forged from desperation, a martyr trapped in brilliance, a guardian chained by his own design. He is order born from chaos, and chaos born from order. He is everything you never understood. The firmament drifted closer, unable to stop itself. Its light dimmed even further in the Emperor's presence, not because he overshadowed it, but because his existence defied the laws the firmament had once imposed upon creation. Where the firmament had shaped galaxies with cold purpose, the Emperor had shaped an empire with will. Where the firmament had demanded unity, the Emperor had demanded survival. The firmament's voice, thin and fractured, stirred across the psychic plane. You are not my child, yet you carry the wounds of my legacy. The Emperor did not answer. His silence was absolute. But beneath that silence, beneath the shroud of suffering and power, the firmament sensed something moving. A flicker of awareness, a faint recognition, as if he, too, felt an echo of familiarity in the presence of this primordial architect. The firmament reached deeper, desperate for understanding. Tzeentch tightened the threads of his spell. Do you see now? This universe does not belong to you. It belongs to mortals. Their fear gave birth to us. Their faith sustains him. Their chaos shapes everything you once tried to control. The firmament's thoughts trembled as the truth settled like a weight of collapsing stars. The old ones had reshaped creation. Mortals had reshaped the warp. Chaos had become sovereign. The Emperor had become the last bulwark. This was no longer the firmament's universe. This was a universe forged by rebellion, refined by suffering, ruled by gods of corruption and a god of dying will. The psychic wind surged suddenly. The throne's echo flared. A crackle of golden lightning tore through the warp, lashing across the firmament's awareness with searing force. The illusion shuddered. The vision fractured. For an instant, barely a heartbeat, the Emperor's eyes opened. They blazed with agony, brilliance, and defiance unfathomable. The firmament staggered, overwhelmed. Then the vision shattered. The psychic thread snapped, and the firmament was hurled back into its broken body above Veneris' sanctum. The shimmering coils of Slanesh still clung to it. The sky still churned with Tzeentch's shifting flame. The world still trembled beneath divine conflict. But now the firmament trembled with something new. For the Emperor's gaze, silent, dying, yet fierce, lingered like a scar across its consciousness, and in that scar lay a warning. The Chaos Gods were not merely tormenting the firmament. They were preparing to destroy the Emperor as well. The firmament's fractured light flickered. The great game had moved beyond torment. The next move would reshape the fate of both architect and empire. The firmament's consciousness reeled as it returned to its fractured body, the emperor's brief, burning gaze still carved into its awareness like a wound. The echo of that golden stare lingered with unbearable weight. Defiance wrapped in agony, strength forged in sacrifice, a flicker of purpose that felt alien to a being born from perfect order. The firmament trembled beneath the revelation. This universe did not bend to ancient laws. It survived through will far more ferocious than harmony, and the chaos gods intended to snuff out that will. The rift churned as Tzeentch's influence unfurled further, threads of shifting flame weaving into the plague remnants of Nurgle and the lingering iridescent coils of Slaanesh. Khorne's rage pulsed at the edges, restrained only by the need for precision in this particular moment of torment. The firmament saw their combined intent gathering in the warp, a storm not of destruction, but of finality. They meant to erase it, not merely from this world, not merely from this galaxy, but from the memory of existence itself. Mortals below sensed none of this clarity. They only felt the rising heat, the twisting air, the agony of their senses stretched past breaking. The canoness clutched her rosarius with bloodied fingers, praying through ragged breaths as the plaza buckled beneath her. Around her, the surviving guardsmen staggered like drunkards lost in a nightmare of shifting reality. But through the haze of pain, she noticed something change. The firmament's light, flickering, fractured, dimmed, did not extinguish. It began to expand, slowly at first, like the last breath of a dying star struggling to rise. Then, with sharper intent, as its inner cosmos, though wounded, ignited with ancient memory, the firmament reached inward, past the rot Nurgle had left embedded in its essence, past the seductive coils of Slaanesh's influence, past the fractured illusions Tzeentch had woven through its thoughts. It reached deeper, toward the echo of what it once was, toward the first stars, the universe before, the era before the old ones, when creation answered to one voice alone. A tremor rippled across the world as the firmament summoned memory into reality. Within its sphere, dim, galaxies flared bright, feeding the being with a surge of primordial radiance. Each star within it burned like a defiant heartbeat, echoing the Emperor's brief, blazing stare. For the first time since entering the 41st millennium, the firmament did not merely endure, it remembered. The warp recoiled as ancient authority stirred, the rift flickered with unease. Tzeentch's laughter sharpened in agitation. Slaanesh's coils constricted more tightly, desperate to drown the awakening light. Nurgle's rot pulsed faster, eager to smother this resurgence before it became uncontrollable. Khorne's rage flared in anticipation of a stronger foe, but the firmament broke free. A pulse of radiant force erupted from its core, shattering the illusions clinging to it. Slaanesh's seductive silk tore away in motes of shimmering dust. Nurgle's vines disintegrated into ash. Tzeentch's threads snapped, unraveling into flaming feathers that dissolved into the storm. The firmament rose higher, its fractured form straightened. Cracks sealed, though not fully. Light deepened, though not purely. It remained wounded, but awakened. Within its glow danced silhouettes of ancient constellations, swirling into alignment like soldiers responding to a forgotten commander's call. The firmament summoned them, not illusions, not memories, stars, small at first, avatars, fragments of cosmic fire given shape by the firmament's will. Each appeared as a burning sphere suspended in midair, trailing ribbons of starlight as they took their place in a widening pattern. Their glow washed across the plaza, pushing back the warp's influence. The canoness lifted her head, eyes widening as starlight shimmered across her bruised face. More appeared, dozens, hundreds, a constellation army forming around their creator. The warp roared in fury, reacting like a wounded beast. Khorne lunged, his shadow slamming against the wall of stellar radiance. Slaaneş's voice sharpened into a scream of thwarted desire. Nurgle's rot surged like a tide, only to evaporate in the starfire. Tzeentch unleashed spiraling torrents of mutating flame, but they curled impotently against the forming constellation shield. The firmament's voice echoed across the trembling atmosphere. My stars remember me. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath, for in this moment, the firmament no longer appeared as a wounded relic of a forgotten age. It stood radiant, surrounded by the avatars of suns that had been forged in the dawn of existence. Each star hummed with harmony, binding the firmament with strength and memory. The Chaos Gods recoiled, not in fear, but in irritation. They had expected the firmament to collapse. They had not anticipated resistance, and certainly not this. But the firmament felt something else. Not triumph, weakness, because as the stars burned brighter, it sensed corruption threaded through some of them. Hairline fractures in their radiant forms, thin veins of warp-touched mutation. The firmament staggered, shocked at the revelation. Even its own stars, fragments of its ancient essence, were not free of the warp's corruption. They flickered with tainted glow, warped by the 41st millennium's psychic storms. Some stars had been corrupted, some had been claimed. The firmament's voice faltered. The stars nearest to it warped suddenly, twisting into grotesque spirals of molten flesh and fire. Their radiant forms cracked open, birthing shrieking warp beasts shaped from the corrupted stellar essence. Slaaneş laughed with cutting delight. Tzeentch's voice hissed with satisfaction. Nurgle crooned at the beautiful decay. Khorne roared with anticipation of new foes. The firmament realized the truth with cold horror. Its children, the stars it had forged at the dawn of existence, had been tainted by chaos over millennia. Their corruption was not recent, it was ancient. The firmament staggered backward as one of the corrupted star beasts lunged toward it, jaws of plasma snapping hungrily. Another spiraled toward the ground, crashing onto the plaza in an explosion of warped starlight that sent mortals screaming. Yet the firmament rallied, summoning the uncorrupted stars to shield the world. They responded instantly, loyal, bright, unwavering. Radiant fire clashed with warp-twisted plasma. Celestial purity battled cosmic corruption in a storm of light that shook the heavens. Mortals stared upward in terror and awe. The canoness whispered through trembling lips, "Even star in can be corrupted." And the firmament understood. This universe was not merely ruled by chaos. It had been rewritten by it. Even the children of the first universe were no longer purely its own. The firmament drew in damaged starlight, pain rippling through its wounded core. The Chaos Gods, emboldened, pressed closer. The rift widened. The universe trembled, because the war ahead would not be fought only against chaos, but against the firmament's own corrupted legacy. The Constellation Legion burned in tortured radiance as corrupted star beasts tore against the uncorrupted suns. Starlight clashed with warp plasma in violent spirals that illuminated the heavens for miles, turning Veneris Sanctum's scarred surface into a stage of cosmic warfare. Each collision sent shockwaves rippling through the atmosphere, cracking stone, toppling shattered towers, and forcing mortals to their knees beneath a sky wrenched between creation and damnation. The firmament hovered at the center of the maelstrom, its form flickering between brilliance and fracture with every moment. Half its stars obeyed, forming shields and lances of harmonious light. The other half twisted in corrupted spasms, seeking to devour their untainted kin or tear into their creator. The firmament strained to keep its will intact, trying desperately to bind the corrupted fragments back into harmony. But the warp's grip on them was old, deep, and merciless. Above, the rift writhed violently, widening into a monstrous wound that pulsed with unrestrained chaos. Through its depths, shadows of the Force swelled, vast silhouettes of blood, flame, rot, and shimmering agony. Their presence pressed against reality so fiercely that the air turned heavy, thick with potential collapse. The Chaos Gods did not fully emerge. No single world could bear their totality. Instead, they leaned across the threshold, pulling their essence together into a single colossal act of annihilation. They had tired of games. They meant to end the firmament. The Canoness, barely conscious, shielded her eyes as another corrupted star beast fell from the sky in a burning arc. It crashed into the plaza, exploding in a burst of twisted starlight that sent molten shards skittering across the ground like living knives. The shockwave threw her backward. She landed hard, ribs shattering, air torn from her lungs. But even as pain blinded her vision, she forced herself to rise again. Her job was not to fight. It was to witness. Above her, the uncorrupted stars circled inward, forming a loose phalanx around their wounded creator. Their radiance intensified as they intercepted the lunges of their corrupted brethren, burning away warp mutations in flares of white gold fire. Some succeeded, others fell, their light extinguished in shrieks too ancient and too vast for mortal comprehension. The firmament felt each loss as a stab of agony, a piece of its being torn away. I am diminished, it thought, the realization echoing through its wounded consciousness. I am incomplete. The Chaos Gods felt the tremor of weakness and pressed their advantage. Khorne struck first, driving a tidal wave of crimson fury across the sky. The air vibrated with the psychic weight of centuries of slaughter, forcing even uncorrupted stars to flicker in distress. The firmament countered with a blast of harmonized radiance, but the force of its retaliation wavered. Its injured cosmos trembled. Slaanesh followed, weaving threads of irresistible sensation through the battlefield. Radiance warped into intoxicating patterns. Some uncorrupted stars hesitated, caught in the beauty of their own reflections, hesitation that proved fatal as corrupted fragments rammed into them, splitting them apart in bursts of fractured luminescence. Nurgle pressed next. A cloud of rot billowed from the rift's depths, pressing like a suffocating blanket over the battlefield. Where it touched corrupted stars, they swelled with strength. When it brushed against pure ones, their light dimmed, the weight of despair threatening to smother their fire. Then came Tzeentch. A spiraling lance of warp sorcery streaked toward the firmament, braided from futures unseen and possibilities bound in paradox. The attack tore through stars, corrupted and pure alike, before hurtling straight toward the center of the celestial host. The firmament braced, but its shield faltered. The lance struck. Agony ripped through every fracture. The firmament's inner cosmos convulsed as it was hurled backward in a cascade of shattering radiance. Its light dimmed to near transparency. Stars flickered. Galaxies within its body cracked apart like glass under strain. Mortals on the ground screamed as the heavens shook. The Chaos Gods surged forward as one. Their combined essence formed a vast, swirling vortex, an abyss of madness, death, excess and mutation. It expanded across the sky, devouring starlight, consuming the corrupted fragments, threatening even the uncorrupted suns. The vortex grew until it engulfed nearly the entire horizon. The firmament hovered at its center, a dying spark caught in the gravity of cosmic extinction. The canoness felt despair sink claws into her heart. The firmament's glow was nearly gone, dim as a candle guttering in a hurricane. She reached toward it with a trembling hand, though she could barely see, barely breathe. "Stand," she whispered, though no sound left her throat. The firmament sensed her faint plea. In that fragile mortal voice it found a single point of anchoring clarity, a thread of purpose that echoed the Emperor's own silent defiance. It seized that thread, binding it to itself like a final tether against oblivion. But the vortex grew. Chaos pressed inward. The rift yawned wider, its edges warping toward the planet's crust. The sky bent. Mountains cracked. Oceans heaved. The warp's gravity pulled the firmament closer, intending to drag it into the abyss, tear it apart, unmake it. Yet even as the firmament was drawn toward destruction, a thought ignited deep within its core. I was the first sky. I will not end as a forgotten shadow. It summoned its remaining stars. Those that still obeyed flared in a final act of devotion, forming a spinning bastion around their creator. A luminous sphere of celestial fire, battered, trembling, yet defiant. The chaos vortex closed in. The firmament burned, brilliant, desperate, dying. The sphere of stars shattered through the vortex's edge and collided with the raw will of the four. Reality screamed. Light and darkness merged. The world disappeared in blinding radiance. When the brilliance faded, the firmament was gone. The chaos vortex trembled, and something enormous, something ancient, impossible and terrible, began to emerge from the collapsing rift. The four were no longer merely attacking. They were entering the battlefield themselves. The rift gaped like a wound across reality, its edges jagged with raw warp energy. And from it, the four emerged fully, colossal beyond comprehension. Shadows of the gods stretched across Veneris' sanctum, blotting the world in a twilight of red, green, violet, and shifting iridescence. The firmament's light, once a radiant orchestra of stars, flickered violently under the combined weight of their presence. Its form cracked, its core pulsed with agony, and yet it hovered, refusing to collapse entirely. The universe had taught it that even the strongest could endure, and so it endured. Khorne struck first, his axe shadow descending like the culmination of all wars ever fought, every battlefield that had stained the blood of 1,000 worlds pulsing with the god's wrath. The psychic weight of centuries of slaughter crushed at the firmament's essence, fracturing stars within its body and turning them to molten streaks of light. Pain flared like nova fire, coursing through its ancient form. For the first time, the architect of creation understood true vulnerability. Slaanesh pressed next, and the sensation was unbearable, blinding, seductive, intoxicating. The firmament's senses reeled as pleasure and agony entwined into a single assault upon its consciousness. Every fractured thought twisted toward surrender, every memory of cosmic purpose reshaped into yearning for oblivion. Yet, buried beneath the pain and desire, a faint flicker remained. The canoness's faith, the tether to mortal defiance, the echo of the Emperor's silent gaze. Nurgle exhaled his miasma of rot, suffocating stars and corrupted fragments alike, turning some to sludge and others to putrid blossoms of demonic life. The firmament's inner cosmos shuddered as the filth wormed into its harmonies, trying to drown the remnants of order in entropy. Even its will, vast and ancient, struggled under the ceaseless pressure. Tzeentch then unfolded his labyrinthine malice. A storm of future possibilities and twisted fates assailed the firmament's mind, fracturing perception, seeding doubt, and tempting it toward surrender. The architect's calculations, once precise and infinite, fractured in the face of uncertainty. For every path of survival, 1,000 alternative deaths opened, collapsing inward like unstable stars. And yet, even amidst this symphony of torture, the firmament remained, fractured, shattered, desperate, but aware. Its inner stars blinked, dim, some extinguished, others sputtering in stubborn defiance. Its mind, a lattice of creation's memory, remembered the age before chaos, the age before rebellion. It remembered the birth of galaxies, the perfect resonance of cosmic symphony, and it remembered the betrayal, the children who had rejected order, who had fractured the universe into what it now observed. It understood that what faced it now was the culmination of all its failures, a reckoning born of time itself. The four advanced in unison, closing the rift like predators around a wounded apex. The sky became a theater of incomprehensible power. Waves of warp light tore the atmosphere apart. The firmament of the planet itself buckled beneath the psychic roar, mountains cracking and forests igniting spontaneously from the energies coursing above. The firmament, battered and fractured, extended every fragment of its will. It called upon the last remnants of uncorrupted stars, weaving them into blades and shields of radiant harmony. They moved with deliberate purpose, striking at the closest warp, projections, and dissipating them into cosmic dust. Each strike, however, exacted a toll. The radiance within the architect's body dimmed further with every collision. Cracks ran like veins of molten light across its surface. Some stars extinguished, others reduced to flickering shards of memory. It could not endure much longer. Khorne's axe descended again, striking not with precision, but with the force of inevitability. The blow fractured the firmament's outer shell, sending shards of starlight scattering across the sky. Slaanesch's tendrils lashed inward simultaneously, entwining the cracks, twisting sensation into agony, attempting to draw the architect's consciousness inward, toward submission. Nurgle's miasma seeped into the wounds, corroding and bloating what remained. Tzeentch's impossible geometries pierced the gaps, filling the fractures with visions of futility and collapse. The firmament screamed, not in sound, but in the language of creation itself. Galaxies shivered within it. The stars that remained loyal burned fiercely, attempting to maintain order against the tide of corruption. Yet, even their brilliance could not match the combined will of four gods, millennia of mortal despair, and the warp-touched reality surrounding them. Time itself seemed to stretch and fold. The architect's thoughts, once infinite in clarity, splintered under the pressure. Memory and perception collided. It saw the lives of mortals below, the canoness, the priests, the trembling guardsmen, caught in the orbit of forces beyond comprehension. Their defiance resonated faintly, anchoring fragments of the firmament's being, giving it moments of resistance. And yet, the force pressing against it was relentless. With a final, monumental surge, the force struck in unison, a psychic crescendo that threatened to erase the architect entirely. Reality quivered, space twisted, stars within the firmament shattered, releasing torrents of radiant energy that clashed against the god's assault. Every shard burned with remembrance of a universe that had once been perfect. And yet it was insufficient. The pressure intensified, collapsing thought into thought, light into darkness, order into chaos. And then, in a single, impossible instant, The firmament's core fractured. Its inner cosmos imploded, a cathedral of stars folding inward upon itself, spinning, shrinking, and finally exploding in a cascade of radiant echoes. The architect's form splintered into countless fragments, scattering across the warp like embers in a hurricane. Its voice, once resonant with the memory of all creation, fractured into a whisper of pure awareness, barely perceptible, carried on the currents of the Imperium. Even so, a fragment remained, weak, fading, yet aware. It hovered in the void between worlds, witnessing the victory of the Four. The corrupted stars drifted like remnants of a dead symphony. Mortals, still below, gazed upward in terror, unable to comprehend the full scale of what had just transpired. The canoness collapsed to her knees, eyes wide, breath stolen. She knew, instinctively, that the universe she had called home had just been touched by a force older than comprehension, and that even the architect itself, ancient beyond reckoning, had been brought to the edge of annihilation. The firmament's remnants hung in the void, battered, bleeding, but conscious. It understood that the Four had learned from every failure of its first creation, that the universe had grown crueler, sharper, more cunning in its defenses. For the first time, the architect felt doubt, a sensation foreign and unwelcome. The knowledge settled like a stone in its being. The war was far from over. Even if it survived, even if fragments endured, the Chaos Gods would return, and their power had now been proven sufficient to challenge a maker of worlds. And beneath that realization, deeper still, the whisper of mortal faith lingered, a fragile, stubborn thread that had refused to be extinguished. Even now, it offered a tether, a reason to endure, and a spark of hope that the architect had thought lost to the ruin of the ages. But survival alone was no victory. The universe had changed, and the architect's understanding of creation would never be the same again. The firmament drifted through the fractured currents of the warp, shards of its former self spinning like wounded stars through the infinite chaos. Its light, dim and fragmented, illuminated nothing but the endless void of psychic currents, a realm where thought and substance bled into one another. It had survived the fury of the Four, but survival was a hollow victory. Each fragment of its being felt the weight of failure, the sharp sting of loss, the bitter recognition that even its might could be bent and broken by forces it had once considered subordinate. Every pulse of the warp pressed against it, carrying whispers of the universe's corruption, echoes of the agony it had witnessed and endured. Khorne's hunger lingered in the currents, twitching like a blade in anticipation of another strike. Slanesh's seductive coil shimmered at the edges of perception, promising solace through surrender. Nurgle's miasma still clung, slow, loving, corrosive. Tzeentch's labyrinthine illusions continued to twist, revealing futures where every attempt at order ended in catastrophe. The Four had learned from the architect's first miscalculations, and they pressed every advantage with the patience and precision of immortals. Yet deeper within the warp, in a place beyond reach of their immediate perception, a fifth presence waited, neither a god nor a demon, neither mortal nor immortal. Something older than the currents themselves, patient and unfathomable. Its presence radiated neither malice nor desire, only possibility. It spoke not in words, but in currents of understanding that brushed against the fragments of the firmament, pulling at them, offering cohesion where there had been only fracture. "I can restore what you have lost," it whispered. "I can bind your fragments, give you form, grant you power beyond what you have known." The voice was neither kind nor cruel. It was simply a proposition, a possibility that challenged the firmament's will, tempting it with something the four could not offer. Survival, yes, but at a price that was unknown, inscrutable, and absolute. The architect recoiled instinctively, resisting the notion of dependency. It had always been the creator, the architect of galaxies, the first master of harmony. To accept aid, even from an entity beyond comprehension, felt like betrayal. You are diminished, yet unbroken. The presence continued, drawing the firmament deeper into the warp. You have seen the corruption of your own stars. You have witnessed the strength of your enemies. You have endured the four. Alone, you may yet fall. But with my guidance, you may rise again. The firmament considered the offer. Its fragments drifted slow and disoriented through the flowing chaos. Memories of its creation swept through it. Memories of galaxies birthed, stars harmonized, the first laws of reality imposed. Yet interwoven with those recollections were the failures, the rebellion of the old ones, the corruption that had crept across its children, the relentless cunning of chaos. It had endured countless millennia, yet now it hung on the brink. Fragments scattered and bleeding, its purpose threatened. "What do you ask in return?" it whispered, the sound of thought piercing the void, unsteady and sharp. The fifth presence did not answer directly. Instead, it extended a fragment of itself into the firmament, a shimmering tendril of comprehension that wrapped around the wounded core. In that instant, the architect glimpsed the price. Universes, unmade and remade, bound by obedience to a will neither understood nor fully seen. Freedom, as it had known it, would be curtailed. Its power would be augmented, yes, but always tethered to a covenant that would forever define its purpose beyond its own design. The offer was not a gift. It was a law, written in the currents of the warp and sealed in silence. The firmament recoiled, instinctive and absolute. Its fragments spun violently, some erupting in bursts of light, others fading to near invisibility. Yet the presence held steady, patient, unwavering. Its pull was neither forceful nor seductive. It was inevitability rendered as a possibility. Every option, every path the architect had considered converged toward the same conclusion. To refuse was to remain fractured, vulnerable to the four, to mortal frailty, to time itself. To accept was to endure, to rise again, but at a cost not yet understood. For a long, timeless moment, nothing moved but the currents of the warp and the trembling fragments of the firmament. Khorne, Slanesh, Nurgle, and Tzeentch lingered at the periphery, pressing in, anticipating the next move, but unable to pierce the architect's drifting attention. It was alone in its decision, suspended between annihilation and a transformation that could redefine its being. Finally, a fragment of the firmament reached outward. Not fully, not as a surrender, but as acknowledgement of potential. Its light, though faint, flared in concentric ripples through the void, touching the tendril of the fifth presence. Understanding passed silently between them. It did not speak. It did not promise. It only extended the possibility of restoration, of cohesion, of preparation for the battles yet to come. The warp shifted in response. The currents that had held the four's assaults at bay now swirled with new potential, restructuring the fragments, stabilizing fractures, weaving remnants of stars into tentative unity. The firmament could feel power returning, raw and dangerous, but also constrained, bound to a law it had not yet learned, tethered to an unknown covenant. The choice had been made in principle, if not in finality. Below, the mortals of Veneris Sanctum remained unaware of the negotiations and bargains struck in the infinite, incomprehensible depths of the warp. Dust hung over the plaza. Cathedrals leaned precariously. Survivors gazed at the fractured sky, sensing something monumental had transpired, though they could not name it. Even the canoness, kneeling amid the debris, felt the faint pulse of distant radiance, a light that hinted at hope even amidst devastation. The firmament, still fractured but gathering coherence, drew a slow breath of cosmic awareness. It could sense the Four's impatience growing, could feel the weight of future battles pressing forward. Yet now, with this unknown fifth presence as a tether, the architect's fragments began to pulse in synchrony, tentative but persistent. Strength was returning. Harmony, though incomplete, flickered within the shattered core. And in that flicker, a singular truth crystallized. The war was far from over. The stakes had changed. The firmament would rise again. But when it did, the universe itself might be remade, according to terms yet unseen, bound by a law older and more inscrutable than even the four gods could comprehend. And from the heart of the warp, the fifth presence whispered once more, not as a command, not as a threat, but as a certainty. The game is not yet finished. The firmament had coalesced, its fragments, once drifting like shattered stars through the infinite currents of the warp, now pulsed in hesitant synchrony. Light flickered across its fractured form, sometimes brilliant, sometimes dim, yet ever persistent. The remnants of the primordial architect hovered above Veneris Sanctum, a radiant storm of potential and power. The sky remained scarred, coloured by the lingering essence of the Four. But within the architect's core, a new order stirred. Something old, yet redefined. Something strong, yet tempered by experience. It was no longer the first sky, untested and absolute. It had endured, had fractured, had been tempted, assaulted, and almost destroyed. It had survived, and from survival it had learned. Below, the mortals of Veneris Sanctum lifted their eyes. The canoness, bruised and bloodied, felt the pulse of returning light. The uncorrupted fragment of the firmament glimmered like dawn breaking through a storm-torn night. Even those who had fallen to fear or seduction felt its presence, the faintest warmth of assurance in the midst of ruin. Their faith, once fragile and trembling, now reached across the psychic void to brush against the architect, lending it purpose beyond its own calculations. The firmament recognized it, however faint, mortal defiance, hope forged in terror, and devotion born of suffering. But even in its reconstitution, the shadows of the Four lingered. Khorne's rage simmered like molten iron on the edges of perception. Slaanesh's coils of irresistible allure lingered, still attempting to tempt, to distort. Nurgle's wrought miasma drifted in the periphery, patient and suffocating. Tzeentch's threads twisted and weaved, seeking loopholes and fractures in the architect's recovered form. They had not been vanquished. They had been challenged, and yet they persisted, looming at the edges of reality, hungry, patient, eternal. The universe had become a theatre for their power, and they would not abandon it. The firmament, aware of its own limitations, turned inward and outward simultaneously. It wove the uncorrupted stars around its core into shields, lances, and sentinels. It extended tendrils of harmonized light into the warp itself, probing for the currents where the Four gathered, calculating vulnerabilities, mapping paths to confrontation. Its perception stretched across time and space, weighing possibilities and contingencies, aware that no direct assault would succeed against beings of such scale. Strategy, subtlety, and precise force would be its weapons, just as much as raw radiance. And yet, even as it prepared, something else stirred. From the heart of the warp, the fifth presence, the enigmatic force that had offered the architect cohesion, restoration, and tethering, remained patient. Its essence did not command, did not manipulate. It merely observed, subtly reinforcing the fragments, providing stability against the corrosive influence of chaos. Its presence was a guide, a foundation upon which the firmament could rebuild, but not a replacement for will. The architect understood that. Its power remained its own, sharpened by circumstance, tempered by failure, strengthened by the lessons of endurance. Below, mortals felt the anticipation ripple through the fractured plaza. Survivors huddled among the ruins, sensing that a new reckoning was about to begin, though none could comprehend its scale. The canoness, rising unsteadily, whispered prayers not of surrender, but of vigilance. "Stand," she urged softly, as though speaking to the architect itself. "Stand. Let the light endure." Her voice, frail but steadfast, carried across the psychic currents, embedding a spark of mortal defiance into the pulse of the firmament. The four perceived this resurgence and responded instinctively. Their collective attention sharpened, converging upon the architect with renewed focus. Khorne's rage surged first, a storm of slaughter principle ready to crush. Slanesh's seduction wrapped tighter around the tendrils of light, seeking to disrupt coherence. Nurgle's rot pressed inward, invisible yet suffocating. Tzeentch's threads flickered, weaving, unraveling, testing, and probing for any lapse in the architect's restored form. The battlefield of reality itself shuddered under the psychic and physical weight of these forces. But the firmament stood, its fragments aligned in careful orbit, radiance flaring intermittently to counter the pressures of each god. Its stars, loyal and resolute, blazed with the memory of creation. Even corrupted fragments, though weakened and unstable, had been guided back into partial cohesion, tethered by the architect's will. This unity was fragile, provisional, and imperfect, but it was enough. Enough to resist, enough to endure, enough to act, and act it did. The architect extended its influence outward, sending pulses of harmonized light into the warp. Its radiance struck at the edges of the rift, dispersing threads of chaos, scattering projections, and testing the patience and coordination of the four. The reaction was immediate. Rage, seduction, rot, and schemes surged back in greater magnitude, colliding against the firmament's defenses, creating a storm of psychic and cosmic force. The air above Veneris' sanctum tore, the sky fractured, and yet the architect persisted, every pulse a statement of resilience. It understood the stakes now. This was no longer a test, no longer an awakening. This was a war to define the fate of the universe itself, a war the firmament could not lose, for its loss would mean the domination of the four unchallenged, the permanent corruption of the cosmos, and the extinguishing of the spark of creation it had once nurtured. The Emperor's silent gaze, the Canoness's trembling faith, the memory of stars uncorrupted, all became its anchors, its reasons to endure. A roar unlike any mortal or divine sound echoed through the warp. The four recoiled momentarily, sensing not defeat, but recognition. The architect had survived beyond expectation. Its fragments, though damaged, radiated a resolve born of suffering and tempered by experience. Its strategy was no longer reactionary. It was deliberate, patient, and infinitely dangerous. The firmament gathered itself fully, luminous once more, not as it had been in its first life, but stronger, wiser, and aware of the vulnerabilities that had once betrayed it. Around its fractured core, its stars formed shields, lances, and sentinels, preparing for a confrontation far beyond mortal understanding, a war that would echo across the warp, the material universe, and the very foundations of reality. The four readied themselves, tension radiating like a predator's gaze across the infinite battlefield. The firmament pulsed once, sharply, deliberately, and the universe waited for the war that would decide the fates of gods, mortals, and creation itself had begun.